Hey guys, welcome back to Teen Muscle Radio, and this is episode number 38. Today we are joined by Peter Fitschen, and we are going to be discussing primarily the rate of loss for bodybuilding competitors, both female and male. So anyone that is listening to this will really provide a great resource for you to know not only when to start your contest prep, but also how to set it up in a format that's going to provide you with the greatest level of muscle retention, and also set you up for success in terms of, at the end of your contest prep, coming out with the least possible damage to you, both in a psychological and physical sense. But yeah, Peter, super happy to have you. I know that we've been going sort of back and forth on our statuses now and again, but it's superb to have you on. And how are you today? You all good?
Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah, glad to be on. I always listen to this, so it's kind of cool to be on the show.
Oh no, amazing. Well, I highly appreciate someone of your level listening in, and like, I know that a lot of your friends and sort of colleagues in the industry have been on, and no, it's awesome to have you. So Peter, for the listeners, just give them a little brief background on yourself, what you do, how you do it, and sort of also from the educational side of things, give them an idea as to what you've done, especially with your PhD and the dissertation that you did for that.
Yeah. So I guess on the education side of things, I have a bachelor's in biochem. I minored in nutrition. I have a master's in physiology, and I got my CSCS after that. So I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Then my PhD is in nutritional sciences from the University of Illinois. And so, that was a tough program. That was 5.5 years after my master's. There was definitely some intimidating parts of that. Probably the largest, most intimidating part was after your first 2 years of coursework, you have a qualifying exam where it's a 2-hour oral exam committee. The chair of my committee was the president of the American Society for Nutrition at the time.
Wow.
That was pretty intimidating. And it was like fair game. Any nutrition question, fair game. I remember at one point, I knew I was doing pretty well, like probably 3/4 of the way through. She asked me to tell her what I knew about chromium. Like it's an ultra trace mineral. There isn't even that much known about it. And so, I knew I was doing pretty well at that point, but yeah, pretty intimidating. But I made it through 11.5 years of college total.
Wow.
And my dissertation, so I worked in a lab during my PhD where we studied muscle loss and prevention of muscle loss in clinical populations. When you're doing research, you have to get funded. You have to have money to be able to do research. You have to have money to be able to support grad students and run assays and buy supplements or dietary interventions or whatever you're doing.
Sure.
And so, it's really hard to get funding for, how to get jacked. Like that's clearly what my interest is, but there's hard to get funding. So There's a lot of funding on the other side, prevention of loss in wasting and clinical conditions. And so I was in a lab really well funded. We looked at muscle loss and loss of function primarily in dialysis patients. We also did some work in elderly and MS patients also.
Okay.
And so, my dissertation was actually on HMB supplementation in dialysis patients. And so the results weren't positive. We didn't see any difference. But, it was 6 months, placebo-controlled, double-blind. We did blood analysis to make sure people were taking the pills. We did everything the right way. And so, it is what it is at that point, but it's published and there's links to all of my papers, either peer reviewed or otherwise on my website. So people can go see that. But yeah, so I have my PhD in nutritional science. And then on the bodybuilding side of things, I started lifting about 2002 when I was 16. I was about 125 pounds. I was going to the gym, met some guys who competed. I went from about 125 to about 170 in the first year and a half I lifted. Those newbie gains, you grow really fast. You grow from literally anything.
Mm.
And so I grew so fast. Some of the guys at the gym were like, "Oh, you're 17. You're young. You're growing real fast. You should do a show with us." And so, I did all the kind of bro methods and didn't know anything. And this was, bodybuilding.com was like in its infancy back then, and that was like really the only source of information out there online. I mean, there wasn't much.
Mm.
And so, I competed in 2004, kind of got absolutely smoked because I wasn't big enough. And so, I just got motivated. Like I really liked it. I just wanted to get better at it. And so I just kept, working and, every few years I competed. And now 2012, I won my pro card. 2016, I did my first pro shows, took top 5 in all of those and even won a smaller one. It's just been 15, years of work to get to this point. And so I've dieted down 5 times, done 10 shows since 2004. I don't know, 2019, 2020 will probably be the next time. I mean, I want to make, at this point in my career, I'm in my early 30s. I want to take, and I've been training for 15 years and I'm natural and I'm pretty average in the genetic department. And so I want to make the most of the years I have left of, good years to make some progress and grow here. And not spend them all dieting down to super low body fat levels. But a couple of years, I'll definitely be back up there. And then on the coaching side of things, I was always helping some friends throughout school. I was going to more and more school related to exercise, nutrition, bodybuilding, and I had done fairly well in the sport. And I think a lot of that too was I got in working with guys like Lane prepped me in 2006 when nobody really even knew who he was, and I got in with some of those guys pretty early on. And so I learned how to, and so I started helping some friends and then they kept telling more people and I started, I kind of expanded out and, by the time I finished my PhD, like the last part of my PhD, I was essentially working a full-time job with my business and trying to finish my PhD. And so I think that I think stretched it out probably an extra half a year because, because of that, my PhD. But, once I was done, I had a full-time job and I've been doing this, full-time ever since, which is awesome because, if you'd asked me 10 years ago what my ideal like dream job would be, it's pretty much what I do, but I didn't ever know that it was the realistic possibility to get, get to this point.
Yeah.
And so, I always assumed when I started my PhD that I would, be a professor somewhere. I want, go teach at a smaller school, more teaching-based school, and be a professor, that focus more on teaching.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought I was going to do. And it turned out this way. And like I said, I really enjoy what I do. So I work a lot of hours because I want to keep it that way.
Yeah, no, awesome, Pete. Well, yeah, no, it's like I said, your resume is awesome. Not only do you have educational background, but also bodybuilding background, like several years of competing, and also having that idea of taking enough time to improve your physique and then coming back different and better each time. Especially since earning your pro card, I think when some people do earn their pro cards, like they're sometimes not ready for the pro ranks and they step up too early. But obviously you took significant time off, stepped up, and placed really, really well. So yeah, I mean, awesome to have you on. Awesome intro for sure. I'm sure everyone knows about you now, which is awesome. Let's crack into things. So first off, when getting ready for a bodybuilding show, we know that the start point is going to be a big factor in where we end up in the sort of the end result. And a lot of people seem to get this point confused, and especially people that haven't potentially competed before. So, and I asked this to a few other people and other podcasts, so I'm definitely interested to hear your opinion. But let's take for example someone who hasn't competed before. How do we gauge as to the readiness for this individual to start a contest prep, both in regards to sort of psychological issues or habits that they've potentially got with food, and also combine that with level of muscularity and condition before starting?
Yeah, so I think there's a few parts to that question, but I think, looking at someone, who's going to compete for the first time, I think it's becoming more and more common people start lifting weights, and like the time they start lifting weights, that's also when they start dieting for their first show.
Yeah.
You see that all the time,
Tell
and
me about
you
it.
know, you really, the end result is you just don't have enough muscle. You don't have enough muscle base.
Yeah.
And where you see that most common, I think the reason it's in that type of thing is, you know, the frequency of that is increased is because, you know, they made new divisions where they're not, you know, men's physique isn't quite as big or quite as lean as bodybuilding, but it's, you still have to have muscle, and it's still really freaking lean compared
Yeah.
to the average person. You know,
Absolutely.
same on the women's side, like bikini. If you see a bikini competitor in stage weight, they're going to be leaner than all the women in your gym and probably have more muscle than a lot of them, you
Yeah.
know, at least the ones that are placing well. And so, you know, I think people think, you know, see, oh, they're not looking for as big as bodybuilding and think, oh, I can do this right away.
Yeah.
And, you know, realistically, you need to have some time out of a deficit and, you know, work on adding strength, adding size, getting a muscle base. You know, in terms of how long, you know, I think it's going to depend on the person. It also is going to depend on what they want to get out of competing.
Okay.
You
Sure.
know, if you want to go in and, you know, just say you've competed, you've made it there, it's kind of just a goal that you're doing, and you know what I mean, like it's just like a one-time thing you don't plan to ever do again. Maybe maybe you lift for a year and then you diet down and you do a show. If you're looking to really, really be competitive, maybe maybe you take several years before you diet down and do a show so that you really have a solid muscle base.
Absolutely.
You know, and maybe, you know, oftentimes one thing I see a lot too, and and I'm someone who probably is guilty of this. I competed before I was ready, but I think it was a really good experience. You know, and then I could, you know, I had only lifted for 2 years before I competed, so about a year and a half before I started dieting down,
Yeah.
which was too soon. I didn't have enough muscle, and I didn't do well. But like I said, I think it was a good learning experience to where then I took another 2.5 years before I stepped on stage again.
Sure.
You know, and that is where I started. I was actually competitive then in novice classes and all right and open. You know what I mean, and open.
Yeah. Sure.
You know, because I took that time, and so I think a lot of that depends on what do you want to get out of it? You know, you know what I mean? And obviously if you want to do better and look better and really maximize progress, spending, you know, more time out of a deficit before you diet down is going to be in your best interest. But one thing I would try to avoid is, you know, I don't know if anyone ever thinks that they're ready, like, you know, that they have the physique that, you know, I've done well, but there's still so many things in my physique I want to change. And, you know, I'm going to diet down again before, like, it's, you know, I'm never going to reach my ideal. You know, you're always chasing that ideal. And at some point, you kind of just got to bite the bullet and go for it. You know, you can't just, otherwise, you know, I know of several friends who never have competed because they haven't gotten to where they want to yet. And they've been lifting 15 years. Like, you're pretty big, you're pretty strong, you could diet down and compete, you know, so at some point, you just kind of got to, you know, bite the bullet and do it. And then on the psychological side of things, I know you talked about, you know, eating disorders and things. Yeah, anytime I see someone with a disordered eating pattern, I usually encourage them not to compete because you need, you know, competing's only going to make that worse. You're going, you know, even if you have a good relationship with food at the start of prep, by the end of prep, when you're super lean, you're going to be thinking about food way more than you should be. You're going to be hungry all the time. You know, and I think one thing coming out of a show that I a lot of times use with clients and ask them about is, you know, how much you thinking about food? How is a question I actually use coming out of a show to make sure we've gained enough fat back that we're okay, you know, and so, you know, I think that, you know, if you don't have a good relationship with food, a good relationship with body image, you know, exercise, you know, getting that straightened out first is going to be important before dieting for a show because it's only going to make it worse. And then a lot of times what you see in those situations are people who diet down, get to stage lean, and then they just stay there. They never like gain weight back. You know what I mean? And then that starts to have consequences on, I mean, they start looking worse over time. There can be health consequences from staying that lean that long. And yeah, you know, you don't want to get into that cycle.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with all of those points. I think that more commonly, and I don't know whether you've seen this with your clients, Peter, but I'd say that it's more a female dominant idea that they need to get on stage really quick. And I think the unfortunate factor in that is because some girls, especially over here in the UK, are actually winning bikini shows, and they
Mhm.
don't have great levels of muscularity. Now, obviously, to make it to sort of the IFBB Pro stage and things like that, some of these girls are really impressive in terms of the level of musculature that they've got, and the balance, and sort of the genetic factors that influences that as well. But I do think, and I do see it, it's like they're almost motivated by the idea of these like Instagram accounts, etc., that are really like girls that haven't been lifting for very long, but have some
Yeah.
glute development,
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I would agree. I've definitely seen that, and I feel like a lot of times I end up talking more people out of competing than into competing,
yeah,
or
same.
just pushing back like when they compete. And I would say that yeah, I think in amateur bikini, you can see people, some people are more genetically gifted,
Sure.
they haven't been lifting that long, they do really well, really quick.
Yeah,
But when you get to the pro level, most people who do well there, natural pro bikini, like they have some muscle, they've been lifting for a while. Like
oh for
it's
sure.
one of those things where like, yeah, maybe you can do all right to a point, but like, you got to put in some more time before you be competitive as a pro. Like
Yeah.
I don't really know of any bikini competitors who have only been lifting for a short period of time who um, really do well as a pro.
Yeah, sure. They'll have taken sort of multiple off seasons,
Yeah.
and I think what I've seen, learning the bikini category myself more with clients that I coach, and also watching online, like the presentation side of things seems to be a huge criteria key
Yeah.
in terms of separating sort of the people that get like fifth call out to first call
Yeah.
out, and obviously there's
Yeah.
huge amounts of people competing, so it's just this separation of athletes that I guess you need to really nail, and that comes with experience. But
Yeah.
let's take an example, because I know this is quite prevalent again in the industry, especially with bodybuilding clients. Let's take an example of you getting an email off someone saying, I want to get in shape, I want to do this show in 25 weeks time. Let's say they have like a decent amount of time, so they've looked
Yeah.
at content, and they've realized that a longer prep is probably ideal for an actual competitor, and they say, I want to do this prep, but they're pretty far out of shape, and
Yeah.
that they're pretty far out of shape. First off, how would you determine that they're out of shape? What sort of data would you get from them as a client when they're signing up or going through your sign-up process?
Yeah.
And then what would be your concurrent advice when someone comes to you sort of out of shape, wanting to get in shape for a show?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing that I require pictures. So, I mean,
Yep.
that's a pretty good indication right there. But pictures, body weight, kind of what they're currently doing, are they really lifting hard or their entire body? How much cardio are they doing? Are they
Yeah.
someone who's already doing like 6 days a week of cardio and they're just eating a ton of food? Or,
Yep.
what's going on? Why are they, there? And so, I think that's the first thing. And then how I would approach that, if I saw someone who had a lot of weight to lose, there's a couple different things I would probably do. One is, especially if they're a first-time competitor, a lot of times for first-time competitors, you don't know, even if they're not way, over stage weight, you don't really know how their body is going to respond. You don't really know where stage lean is. You don't know how psychologically they're going to handle it when they start getting to the really uncomfortable part of prep. They've never been there.
Yeah.
And so, as much as you can tell them how bad it's, deep in prep it can feel and be, they've never been there, so they don't know, and you got to experience it to know what I'm talking about because you've been there. But, someone who has it, you can explain it to them, but until they've been that lean, they just don't know what it feels like.
Sure.
And so for all those reasons, I a lot of times like to have someone start off like for a first prep, if they can, just start dieting. Like, let's
Yeah.
just start shooting for steady loss, a reasonable rate of loss. And then once we get you closer to stage lean, let's pick a show. And I even take that same approach for people who have competed before but didn't get lean enough the last time. Because if you don't know where stage lean is, if you have the freedom to have like multiple show options, you can kind of make sure that you're ready and then pick your show based on you rather than, being forced into a show. So I actually did that my last season for my first pro shows because I knew I'd have to get, leaner than I'd ever been you have to have striated glutes on a pro stage pretty much,
Sure.
at this point. I mean, that's how natural bodybuilding is at this point.
Mm.
And so I knew I needed to be leaner than I'd ever been to be, competitive. Yeah. And so, and so I basically started prep. I worked with Cliff for my prep this year, and we started, prep, and I just had a number of shows. I had options in April all the way through August of 2016,
Yeah.
And so that way, no matter, I had like 1 or 2 options a month, and I knew I was going to do a couple of shows, when I was ready. And whenever I was, and I'd be ready somewhere in there. And when I was ready, I did, I ended up doing 3 shows and a photo shoot over 6 weeks. And did base my shows on when I was going to be ready. And a lot of times I've done that with clients, and the clients that can do that and have the flexibility in their schedule, and live in areas where there are shows options like that, within a few hours of them or whatever, that can be a great option. Because you're worrying about the person rather than trying to fit them, to a specific date. So that's one thing. And I think another thing I oftentimes do with someone who has a lot to lose, maybe someone has 40 pounds to lose to get stage lean. Maybe we drop 20, 25 of those pounds, almost like reverse diet, take a diet break, for a couple months, kind of just hang out at like halfway there and then go the other half, and that's an approach I've used with a few clients also. And it works really, really well, if they have time. And so all of this comes back to time. I mean, if you have more time, you can, if you don't have that set date and you have some options, you have more time, and you can do some of these extra things to make prep more doable rather than this absolutely miserable, experience.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the idea of having diet breaks and sort of separating the process up a bit like how you'd periodize your off season with massing phases and mini cutting phases, makes it psychologically a little bit more I guess bearable comparative to just this long slog of 50 pounds to come off. It's like having no breaks. I definitely think that's something that's gaining popularity now that maybe wasn't so popular in the past, that sort of the diet break idea. So when someone sort of got a show date in mind, that, like you said, the idea of obviously having several show dates is great, but a lot of people will say, I want to do this show and that's it, and that's gospel. And especially in the UK, I'm imagining in the US, you have slightly more federations, you have a bit more options. We have sort of 2 or 3 federations. Sort of like the options that you have are really, there's lots of them, but they're all in different places. So you have to do a lot of traveling if you want to just sort of decide on the day. So if someone had a determined date, how would you go about setting out enough time? So this really comes down to obviously like determining the rate of loss. How would you determine that, and how many weeks would you give per how much they have to lose?
So ideally if you're going to want to be probably shooting for somewhere between 0.5% to 1% of body weight a week. Sure. If you're like overweight, and way above stage weight, maybe you can get away with over 1%, maybe up to like 1.5% or something. Like if your stage weight's like 170 and you're like 250, you could probably get away with a little bit quicker rate of loss, at least at first.
Would you do that at first? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, at first. If someone gets leaner, I would like to not have to, increase their rate of loss.
Sure.
And so, what happens in a lot of people's preps, when they don't give themselves enough time, is rate of loss is moving along at a reasonable rate at first. A few plateaus happen, all of a sudden they're behind, and then rate of loss has to pick up during the portion where you really shouldn't, be pushing hard. If anything, at least keep the rate of loss the same, not faster. Slower may even be better, but not faster. And so, if you're looking at like 1% of body weight a week, for a guy, that might be like, for a guy, maybe, pound and a half, 2 pounds, somewhere in there. So 0.5 kilo to kilo a week or something like that. Depending on the person and their size and where they're at in prep, the leaner they are, maybe closer to the lower end. And for a female, that might be, 0.5 kilo a week or less. Pound a week or less. Especially if they're really small. You know, if they're one of the 5 foot tall, under 100 pound on stage females, I mean, rate of loss isn't going to be very quick.
Sure.
And I mean, for them, oftentimes intake has to get pretty low also, just because they are so small. But so the way I would probably, look at it is, all right, so if we're going to look at prep, and I don't know, I have someone they're going to prep for a show, and they have 20 pounds to lose, and we want to do about a 1 pound a week average rate of loss throughout prep. That means we need at least 20 weeks, just assuming everything goes perfect. But then, you're going to have plateaus along the way. So there are going to be weeks where loss is going to be slower. We may also want to take a diet break or two along the way. So there's extra time needed. Maybe if it's someone I've never prepped before, or maybe it's their first show, maybe we want to be ready a little early to do a mock peak, or to, reverse diet into their show and add a little bit of food going back in, because that typically helps fill someone out. Every time pretty much I've ever done that, the person looks way better on stage.
Yeah.
And so, rather than crashing in and being depleted going in. And so, these are all factors where the more and more time you can give yourself, the more and more of these type of things you can actually do, rather than just having it be this straight diet shot that has to be pretty quick. And so, if I have someone with 20 pounds to lose, we want to lose a pound a week, that's, at least 20 weeks. We'd probably be looking closer to 30, just to, 25, 30, just to have time to do some of those extra things and have the flexibility, to have a diet break if they need it. Something comes up in life. Maybe there's a week where something comes up in life, and, maybe things are a little bit off. Maybe we want to do a mock peak for a week. There's a week we're not seeing any loss, or, things of that nature. Maybe I'll, it's just things like that. And so you want to make sure you have more time, because it's going to also make it less stressful.
Yeah.
You don't want to be stressing that you're behind, and you don't want to set yourself up, for an example of 20 pounds to lose, 20 weeks, you're going to drop a pound a week. If you drop a pound a week for the first 5 weeks, you have 15 pounds to lose at 15 weeks out, but then you don't lose that next week. Well, now you have 15 pounds to lose at 14 weeks out. You know what I mean? It's a rate of loss that you got to make that pound up somewhere. And so, rate of loss starts creeping up there. And so you got to give yourself extra weeks, assuming that there are going to be plateaus, and you may want to take diet breaks, and maybe things come up, and maybe you want to do a mock peak. Maybe you want to be ready a couple weeks early and add a little bit of food going back in, and the more of those things you want to be able to do along the way, the more extra weeks that you're going to have to add.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that sort of side of things. And from a rate of loss perspective, you mentioned sort of the 1 pound, or the 0.8 to 0.5 to a percentage of your body weight per week.
Yeah.
Now, for the listener, what's the rationale behind that? And what's the rationale versus losing it at a quicker rate? And discuss, if you want, also as well, obviously, the research that has been done into this, and sort of why are we doing this? Why are we controlling rate of loss?
Yeah, so if you look at the main probably reason is muscle retention. If you look at the research of someone who's natural and has been training a while, diets quickly, and training a while, like we said, you should have been training a while before you start prep. You shouldn't just be a new lifter.
Yep.
And so if you've been training a while, you're natural, and you diet really quickly, you're going to see more muscle loss. There's more lean mass loss. Especially as you get lean, it seems like that, you know what I mean? It could be that you need to drop even slower to not see that muscle loss. And so the biggest thing, I think, when, throwing out numbers with rate of loss and things, is you could always go slower than 0.5% a week. And, but then it starts becoming, how long do you want to be in a deficit? And so I think it's about striking that middle ground where, you're actually progressing. So if 0.5% to 1% a week is fast enough, you're actually losing and progressing towards that goal, but you're going slow enough that you're retaining, muscle. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I know, in our review that I did a couple years ago with Eric and Alan, Eric wrote that section, I know, but on rate of loss. But, looking through the literature, I would agree with him that about 0.5% to 1% is probably a good rule of thumb for, for someone shooting for, a prep with, closer to that 1% range, looking, at, maybe the early stages of prep, and maybe closer to that 0.5% range in the later stages of prep when someone's lean, so long as they give themselves enough time. That a lot of times becomes the issue that, if they don't have enough time, it's going to have to be faster than that in the later stages, and that may cost them some more muscle. But, looking at case studies in natural bodybuilders, there have been there's about like 4 or 5 that have come out over the last few years, myself being one of them, case studies that have been published. But when you look at natural bodybuilders during prep, it's almost like so far. I mean, again, there are too few data points to say this is a cause and effect, and it's just a correlation. But I mean, as these studies keep coming out, it just seems to be a really fairly strong correlation between those who are losing, percent or so a week, on average during prep, seem to drop more muscle mass than those who are back down around like 0.5 or 0.7% on average a week. And again, that's average over the entire prep. So there may be, times that are faster, slower, whatever. But I mean, I think it just gets at that if you're going to get really, really lean and you want to hold on to muscle, keeping rate of loss slower is going to be beneficial. But then at the same time, you still want to be losing quick enough that you don't spend, a year dropping 10 pounds or, something like that to get on stage, because, you don't need to go quite that slow probably. And that's going to cut into the amount of time you can spend making progress out of a deficit after your show.
Awesome. So when we achieve more than the criteria, so we achieve more than that 0.5 to 1%, what do we do, or what would you do as a coach? Now, would you slow up the process, or would you be inclined to relay it to the situation in prep, whether we're at the start or the finish?
Yeah.
How would you approach that situation of going too fast?
I think it depends on, a few things. So, if someone's been eating sporadically and you just get them on some consistent macros, that first week they're going to see some water glycogen loss, and it might be faster than, that's not uncommon from water glycogen, seeing a little faster rate of loss. But once you get past, kind of that initial water glycogen loss, things kind of stabilize, then you start looking at, well, how fast is it coming off, and how many weeks in a row are we seeing this? If I see a week, that someone, week or week and a half, it's coming off a little quick, I probably don't worry all that much. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, if we're shooting for 1 pound a week and, we're losing like 4, I'd probably be concerned. But like, if we're shooting for 1 a week and like 1.5 pounds comes off for a couple of weeks, I don't get all that worried. We got to look at what's happening over, a longer period of time. Sure. But yeah, I kind of, a lot of times I'm inclined to leave things as is, and oftentimes it kind of slows down a little bit. But if it doesn't, I would probably pull a little cardio, or maybe add a little bit of food back in just to slow it, especially when someone is, they don't give themselves enough time to prep. And so, if you're short on time and someone's dropping a little bit quick and you don't have a lot of that extra time, I'm oftentimes more inclined to, all right, if it's coming off a little quicker, hold things as is. Yeah. Now, if you're someone who gives yourself 8-10 extra weeks for things like diet breaks and whatnot along the way,
sure, maybe
we want to slow that rate a lot. If an earlier show is an option, maybe we don't. Or if an earlier show is not an option, then maybe we slow rate of loss a little bit, and, just to keep you kind of on pace, so that you're not ready like 2 months early. And so, I think a lot of times it depends on the situation and how much extra time a person has given themselves. Sure. And how much more they have to lose, what rate of loss they're going to have to see to get there, how long they still have before their show, how lean they are, all of those factors probably play in.
Sure. I think this is all coming back to potentially having the benefit of a coach for the first time you do this, because I think a lot of people will listen to podcasts like this and want to perfect the process, and that's cool. Like, that's awesome that they want to do that, but at the same time, they're likely to freak out when the protocol doesn't go to plan. And we know how annoying that is for a coach to have a client that's freaking out, and let alone someone that's trying to do it on their own, just freaking out about their rate of loss being too fast and all their muscle coming off, and then also if they're not making progress, they're going to be stressed that they're not on track. And obviously having a coach to sort of listen, this is the plan, stay stress free, and you're going to get there. What about on the other end, Peter? So on the other end of when someone isn't losing at the rate that we want them to lose, what would we do, and how long would we allow these changes to take effect?
Yeah, so I like to look at things in terms of averages. I don't like looking at one day in isolation. And so, a lot of times, people will kind of freak out if the scale goes up a couple pounds one day. I don't care. Like, it's going to go up and down a couple pounds. Like, I'll get emails from people excited that it went down 2 pounds in a day. I don't care. It's one day. Like, it's yesterday to today. What matters is over a longer period of time, because you're going to see this. It's going to fluctuate. You could do the exact same thing each day, and your weight's going to do this. And so, what you want to look at then is not what's happening from day to day, because all you're doing is seeing this, but what's happening from week to week, or longer periods of time, and on average, and trends and things like that. So what happened the last 5, 7, or 10 days versus the previous 5, 7, or 10 days, something like that. On average, is your weight going down? And that's a really good indication, of progress. So you could weigh yourself on the same day each week. Maybe today is Wednesday, so if you weigh yourself today, and then you weigh yourself next Wednesday, you could actually weigh half a pound more next Wednesday, but your average for the week could be down a pound, pound and a half, and you could have a great week of loss.
Sure.
Be making some great progress. And so it's important to look at not just one day, but averages and trends over longer periods of time to tell the whole story.
Absolutely.
And so if I see someone who, if we have, if there's not any external circumstances that might be affecting loss or anything like that, and you have a week where you don't really see a whole lot of loss on average, I usually make some adjustments to try to keep things moving, because, most people don't have an infinite amount of extra weeks, to give it another week and wait. And if they have time and want to give it another week, I don't mind. You know what I mean? It depends on how much time do you have. But for most people, if we're stalled out, you have your average this week, there's no external anything that would be affecting that, then we'll make some adjustments. We'll, pick up rate of loss. In terms of what those are, oftentimes earlier in prep, I probably do a little bit more on the food side of things, especially if someone's food's still higher. Try to not really crank cardio super high if I can avoid it. I know this is something I'm sure, I don't know if you talked about this with Cliff too, but I know he and I have talked about this a few times, that in practice, it does seem like if you can do a little more on the food side of things and get away with a little less on the cardio side of things when you're creating that deficit, the end product does seem to look a little better on stage. And I don't know why. I think part of it might be due to recovery. And that doesn't mean that people aren't doing cardio. I mean, basically all of my clients, except for a few outliers, do cardio to get stage. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
At some point. But we kind of rely on food more so until we kind of have to add in some cardio because food's getting lower.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of that, part of that might be due to the fact that, you have interference and, with concurrent training, when you add, cardio to lifting, you see less, you have conflicting adaptations, and you have less, progress in terms of weights. And from some of the newer research, it looks like that applies much more to people who are advanced lifters than beginners, from what I've seen.
Okay.
And so, if you're competing, you are a more advanced lifter. And so I saw a review from a year or two ago suggested that it was, you don't see as much interference in the beginners, maybe even early intermediates, but as you become more advanced, that's where you see it. So it could be partially due to that, and partially it could be due to, I don't know, maybe just the fact that you have more volume to recover from. I mean, I know that cardio, is not the same type of volume, but it's still, it's not as demanding as lifting, but it's still something you got to recover from.
Sure.
And so, I generally try to adjust more on the food side of things first for most people, maybe keep cardio lower. They still may be doing some, maybe a couple, it's just a day or two, or, something lower, and not really go crazy adding cardio unless I absolutely have to add a bunch,
Yeah.
once food is lower, just to help them recover, and be able to, because the focus is still lifting and moving heavy weights during prep. It's not, doing hours of cardio, you know, and so I don't, like I said, I don't know the exact mechanism why, but it's just something I've kind of noticed. I know Cliff has mentioned the same thing.
Sure. On the topic of training volume, how are you setting up things to sort of like maximize muscle retention? Because what would you say about the sort of the idea behind you having to potentially use or utilize less training volume than we actually think we have to use to actually just retain the muscle mass that we've
Yeah.
got?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I maybe late in prep, someone really grinding, I'll pull volume back a little bit. For the most part, I try to keep volume fairly consistent when someone's
Static.
dieting.
Yeah, yeah.
At the end, yeah, I mean, you're when you're really, really lean, you're doing a lot of cardio, food's low, you legitimately can't recover from as much volume. And so,
Sure.
I'm generally getting feedback from people too when I'm working with training programming during prep to make sure they're still okay.
Yeah.
But for most of prep, I really try to keep volume as is because, yeah, you see some of the literature suggests, yeah, you don't need as much, volume to retain muscle, but those people aren't in a deficit and super lean, and you know what I mean, and you got to, I've seen people who really back off the loads during prep rather than keeping that heavy load and that volume on the muscle. And it
Yeah.
really just
Worse.
does seem like you got to keep that load and that, you know what I mean, that volume on the muscle. You can't
Yeah.
just say, well, I feel crappy now, so I'm just going to, not go as hard.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times you should absolutely be deloading. You know what I mean? There should be recovery periods and
Mm.
all of that. But you still need to train hard to, even though you feel terrible, keeping that load on the bar and trying to maintain strength, during prep, which, I mean, mine tanks so bad at the end, but I mean, just doing what I can to, you know what I mean, to hold strength. Just because my strength's going down doesn't mean I shouldn't still be trying to move, progress as I can,
Sure.
and move what I can.
So
Um,
you mentioned your own strength there, which I'm quite interested in, like how that sort of decreases or tanks towards the end. And
it does.
what do you see before that though? Like for myself, and I'm sure listeners will be interested. Like I've for the most part and I'm interested to hear your side of things. My pulling movements and my lower body movements are actually still either retained or progressed. I'm sort of like at the halfway mark in my bodybuilding prep. My pushes are already declining quite significantly.
Yeah.
Well, what's your experience, and when have you seen this sort of quite big crash or dip?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, so I compete in the upper 150s, carved up.
Okay,
I'm not very big, and so
neither.
uh, yeah, and so I guess this kind of gets back to, I think that most people have some sort of range of body weight. They can kind of, there's probably a minimum of this range of body weight where you should probably sit in the off season.
Sure.
And that bottom end is going to be when hormone levels are normal, when you feel good, you're not hungry all the time, you're not thinking about food. There's some minimum level of body fat you have to get above for
Mm.
everything to be normal. For me, that's probably about 15 to 20 pounds over stage weight, and it's like 175 or so. It's kind of like my, if I'm 190, 195, I can get down to 175, 180 and see very little drop. And you know what I mean? I maintain for the most part. I mean, I'm doing a cut right now, and I cut from 196, I'm down to 181, and I'm almost done here. I'm going to stop around 180 or so. But I'm down maybe a rep or two on everything. I
Nice.
hit the one, I down one or two reps on what I can hit for, like, 6, 8, 10 reps, but
Yeah.
that's it,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't see much drop, here initially. You start pushing me much below that 175, 180 pound range, and that's where I start seeing strength drop. And then, man, like, I start getting below like 160, 160, 163, somewhere in there, and you start really getting close to stage lean, and it's like my strength goes backwards on a weekly basis. Like it's, you know what I mean? With those last few weeks of prep, you know, like I remember, you know, I remember at the end of prep, like I've pulled I pulled 475 for 5 this off season on deads. And,
Nice.
you know, and I remember the end of prep, like doing a hard 6 with 365 at 150, whatever pounds, like,
Wow.
and like, it was hard. Like, but the thing is, I could pull 405 for reps again just after gaining, you know, getting myself even close to 170. I was pulling 405 for at least 5 reps. You know what I mean? Like just that initial 10 pounds, you know, coming back.
Yeah.
And it's just that last little bit getting down to stage lean. Like I just tank. And I know some people do more so than others.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know Brian Whitacre has talked about how his strength just absolutely plummets at the end of, you know, his preps.
Oh, it's interesting. I haven't heard that from Brian, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, he and I were talking about that because he's always someone I've looked up to because he's
Same.
he's like the greatest lightweight natural pro ever, and he's super smart and successful in real life and stuff too. But he and I also are similar size, like similar height, similar weights in the off season, similar weights. You know what I mean? Like I'm a little bit lighter than him on stage, but I'm not a whole lot lighter than what he was when he was my age. But he's like 10 years older than me. So he's always been someone like, all right, here's this pro, similar structure to me, 10 years older that I look at, you know, I can like look up to and try to progress, you know, towards that type of physique. And, you know, and at Lane's camp, I try to pick his brain because, you know, he and I are, you know, similar in you know what I mean? Just similar size.
Sure. Absolutely.
And, you know, and he's told me that like at the end of prep, he loses strength all the time. He's like, I know there's guys who don't, but he's like, I lose strength. He's like, I've had, you know, other people have programmed my training. I've done this, I've done that. Like it just goes down when I'm that lean.
Yeah.
And I'm not the same way.
That is interesting about Brian. I mean, I know that sort of strength will tank in most individuals. Like even some clients that I've had that have shown significant strides in progression throughout most of their prep, towards the end it does take a definite decline. But one thing that I would say on the sort of the Brian side of things is I know that Brian's a huge fan of HIIT. And so, like high intensity interval training. Well, what's your opinion on HIIT and its effects on potential retention of strength? Because I found that I just do not do well on HIIT apps, not at all.
So yeah, that's interesting. So I used to have people do like a crap ton of HIIT and used to always, you know, because if you look at the literature, you know, it's you know, it's as good or better than steady state, you know, and you know, as I've worked with people more and more and more, you know, I use much more of a combination, you know, I would say of HIIT and steady state. So there's some limit of HIIT that someone can recover from, like a day, 2 days, you know, like that many sessions, you know, a week. Like you're not going to do HIIT. I don't know how anyone could recover. Well, there are some people who can tolerate a little more, it seems like, but you know, doing HIIT 7 days a week, like I would just be demolished. There's no way I wouldn't be able to do legs 2 times a week, like, you know, when I'm doing HIIT, you know, 7 days a week. And so, you know, last prep, I did 1 HIIT session a week, you know, and the other couple sessions were steady state, you know, and I kind of take the same approach with clients a lot, you know, much more, you know, lately here where, you know, maybe they're doing 1 or 2 HIIT sessions a week, but you know, we're paying attention to the recovery. There's a lot, you know, we're adding steady state as necessary too. You know, if they need more cardio, because you can't just do, you know, more and more and more HIIT. Like at some point, like you got to recover.
Yeah, no, there's definitely an upper limit. I think what I've seen, like you said, is very, very individual. Like people have different recovery capabilities for weight training. You know, with HIIT being so closely matched to weight training in the recovery capabilities that it requires, it is sort of preference based, and that's why sort of giving yourself feedback on, okay, is this session affecting this session, or is it affecting this session?
So
like being aware.
So like during my prep, I would train legs Monday and Friday, and I would do my HIIT session Wednesday, you know, and then you know what I mean, and I would and I would usually push the sled, so it was more of a full body form of HIIT, you know, but I mean that way I was still trying to break, you know what I mean, I broke it up, and then my steady state I could throw in a couple days with, without it affecting things too much.
Yeah, sure. I am with regards to, and we haven't really talked about it on this episode, but I would like to briefly cover it in regards to macronutrient setup for contest prep phases and maximizing muscle retention. Obviously, we do know the importance of an adequate protein intake, but I think more of the sort of advanced listener that would be interested in knowing this, what's your opinion on dietary fat and where you would set that, especially with regards to female versus males? Because I've heard Cliff share some opinions on this, and I'm just wondering as to your opinion on dietary fat.
Yeah, I think that it's important to have an adequate dietary fat intake. I think that, there are a lot of people who just like, they prep for shows and they eat all clean foods, and you look at what they're eating for fat and it's like less than 20 grams or less a day. And that's not going to be optimal for hormone production or progress or anything like that. I mean, you've got to have some level of fat. And so there's going to be some sort of minimum. And so, a lot of times you see like 0.25 or 0.3 grams per pound kind of thrown out there as like a minimum, or maybe like 20% or so of calories. Something in that type of ballpark is where I try not to go below.
Sure.
And then as far as, and because I think it becomes kind of a juggling act then, because, you got to have adequate protein. And protein needs are, if anything, higher when you're dieting than when you're not, especially when you're really, really lean.
Yeah.
And so you got to make sure you have adequate protein. So that takes a chunk of your calories away, and that's your calories aren't that high, you're in a deficit. And so your chunk of it's got to go to protein. And then it becomes, how do you balance carbs and fat? And so, I think keeping fat above those minimums, is a good rule of thumb, and getting away with what you can for carbs, seems to be is what I would do, because it does seem like if you can get away with what you get away with carb wise, you have better performance in the gym. You seem to recover better. You preserve muscle. You spare muscle. I definitely, I don't know. I would say it's a balance more so that, than one or the other, and so, if it's someone dieting for a show and it's I guess female, male, I don't usually treat it a whole lot different.
Okay.
But it's the same type of approach where I don't want fat getting below a certain point. Like, I'll try to get away with what I can carb wise. Maybe we got to pull carbs back some, maybe in a drastic situation, we got to slightly reduce protein some, even just to try to get some calories down. But yeah, there's a fat minimum I try really to not get below, because I want to make sure it's not going to be an optimal prep if we're not supporting hormone production.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever used a ketogenic approach for anyone at all? Like whether that be a client preference or just you as a coach?
I have not, but I will say that with clients, so I have some clients who are, for example, like a female with PCOS or something like that, who has insulin resistance.
Yeah.
We may have fat kind of down around, 20-25% of calories like normal. And, she has PCOS, she has insulin resistance. Maybe we try bumping that up to like 35-40% of calories from fat, which is going to pull pull carb back, but it's not really ketogenic. They're still eating carbs. Protein's still too high.
Yeah.
Because a true ketogenic diet, protein has got to be pretty low. And I think that's the mistake most people make when they, when they're like, I'm doing keto now. Well, you need to have like 80% of calories from fat, and it's actually a moderate protein, because you're going to throw yourself out of ketosis. And so I've never taken things to that extreme with a client, but yes, absolutely, with some of my clients, we if things aren't really going that well, we may and I'm sure that they're the first place I would go is making sure they're actually tracking everything accurately. If it's a healthy client, no medical conditions whatsoever, things aren't going well, first place I go is, are you tracking everything accurately? Because if you look at the literature and, odds are that right there is the issue, is, you're not reporting something.
Yeah.
because you see it again and again and again and again. So, I mean, just asking question, but, having that dialogue, making sure there is absolutely nothing being missed, is important. If that's the case and there's nothing underlying medically, then maybe, all right, well, let's try, you know what I mean? Let's try a little bit higher fat intake. Let's try a little bit lower carb intake and see if it helps. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? For some people, it doesn't seem to matter. Their intake just has to get super low. But it's something I would play around with, assuming those other things, if things aren't going well with what I would consider more of a traditional macro breakdown, there are a couple things I would check first, you know what I mean, before I would, really do something drastic there.
Yeah. No, that makes sense completely. My final macronutrient question, I guess, is with regards to protein intake. Obviously, we know when dieting down, for a lot of people, male and female, intake has to get really low to get into contest conditioning. How low can you take protein, and what is the point at which it becomes detrimental to muscle retention?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll start by saying I don't know that the answer to this is completely known. So this is just probably more my opinion. Yeah. So the lowest I would probably ever take protein in someone who is, if someone's extremely lean, 1 gram per pound of protein isn't going to be all that far off of 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, because most of their mass is lean body mass, so, when they say 1 to 3 pounds, grams per pound of lean body, 1.0 to 1.3 grams per pound of lean body mass is, I know what Eric always says based on his, research.
Sure.
And, when someone's really lean, if I could, I would keep it above 1, but, a gram per pound is probably the lowest I would, if I got to skip a few calories from protein to make sure they're having adequate fat and maybe at least able to eat some carbs, a gram per pound would probably be the lowest I would go, in someone who's extremely lean. Because again, when you're extremely lean, 1 gram per pound for you is pretty, isn't a whole lot more than 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, because most of you is lean body mass. And my hope would be that you're not taking things to, having to get to that point until you are extremely lean, trying to get that last little bit off. Like, that shouldn't be a starting thing that you have to kind of make that decision on. No. You should be able to lose without, assuming you have no underlying medical conditions, you should be able to lose, without having to worry about, something like that.
Yeah. I guess these are like drastic measures with regards to like dietary fat, ketogenic, and sort of taking protein super low.
Even like ketogenic diet. I mean, I would say the time I could see a logic in considering using it would be that last, someone whose intake's pretty low and they have just a couple more pounds to get off. It's kind of that last thing you use to, to maybe try to get that last. But I wouldn't ever use it really from the start or when someone's too far above. You know what I mean? It's got it. That's the one time I could see logic in using using it is, right. You know what I mean? Like that last little bit. Like if that's that last thing to get that last little bit off.
Yeah.
And I know this is something I've talked to Cliff about this too, and I think he has a similar thought on that. And if you start an approach that's more drastic like that too soon, you probably won't get there.
Yeah.
And I know it's something to talk to him about too. So I think
absolutely.
So that would be my thoughts there.
Cool. Yeah, no, I that's partly the reason I ask it is because we discussed it with Cliff, and I've listened to lots of podcasts with both you and Cliff, and I'm always intrigued as to developing not only my knowledge but also putting out knowledge that sort of other people have. And I love the idea of people having varied opinions. Like I love it when someone has a different approach, and it just makes things exciting and interesting and opens up the doors to things. But essentially what it is, the process is can quite easily be overcomplicated in a sense.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at, so I did a Q&A when I was down at Cliff's last month. It was John, Cliff, and I did a Facebook Live Q&A.
Sure.
And there were questions where you got three different answers, one from each of, that weren't necessarily in agreement. But I think when it comes down to it, I would say that at the heart of it, I would say there still was some agreement. It was just fine details where there may not be.
Sure.
I think, most coaches who are pretty good coaches would agree on probably 95+% of everything they're doing, because a lot of it's the big picture stuff where we're all pretty much in agreement on that. And I think there's a scientific base to support, you know what I mean? Like research is kind of coming out that's showing like, all right, well, yeah, that, there's evidence for that also. And, it's that other stuff, the stuff that, it's more like in art, like Peak Week, for example.
Yeah.
I think most people agree that, who are educated agree that, yeah, probably shouldn't do something drastic. You probably shouldn't cut water or, do crazy manipulations. And if you do those things, you should test them out first, at a couple weeks out to make sure that they're okay. And I think most people would be in agreement on that. Now, how people go about carving up and looking best for the show and making that happen, there's a lot of, differences in opinion. But I think at the heart of it, I'd say most people kind of agree on that first part. You know what I mean? First part.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a huge pool of opinion, and then there's also just a huge area of agreement where people are just, sort of splattering in with their own anecdotal stuff, and people coming up with things now and again that they've seen but can't necessarily back. But it doesn't tend to be so far away from the grain that it's like, holy shit, this is like crazy new stuff.
I mean, it's usually not anything drastically different. It's just like, here's kind of, all right, well, we're kind of agreement on this, and this person kind of takes a tweak, to this on a fine detail, and this person does this little more fine detail. And, when you're getting extremely lean, those type of things can potentially make, some difference when you're at these extremes. But, at the heart of it, I think that even, we're in agreement, a lot of us are, I think, in agreement on a lot of things, and a lot of the differences in opinions are a lot of times just smaller details beyond, the big things.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed, Peter. So cool. I think I have come to the end of my questions. I think this has been a superb resource for people that are looking out to sort of set up their own contest prep and provide themselves, like we said at the start, with the best possible situation for muscle retention. So finally, Peter, just basically leave the audience with anywhere that they can follow you or continue to follow your progression as both a coach and an athlete, and where perhaps you are sort of most active online also.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few places. So I mean, if you want to see, I link all of my articles, all of my, client testimonials, pictures, things like that. You can check out my website, which is fitbodyphysique.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram at fitbodyphysique. You can my emails, fitbodyphysique@gmail.com. I would say Facebook and Instagram are probably the social media I'm most active on, but I'm on email all the time too. That's how I interact with all of my clients. So,
Sure.
Feel free to shoot me an email.
Are you on Instagram stories yet, Peter?
No, I haven't made any stories yet. I haven't gone to that. It was a long time.
Cliff has been forced into doing it, and he's trying. I think he's done like 2 at the moment.
Yeah,
it's getting more popular. It's a great way to interact.
I know. I'm terrible at all the social media stuff. If I have time, I'm gonna write an article, and you know what I mean, because everyone has their own way of getting out there,
play to your strengths.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just, if I have some extra time or I have something I want to write about, once in a while I'll throw up a Facebook post, or I try to post something on Instagram most days, but
yeah, sure.
or I'll do, but a lot of times I'll just write up an article or something, and I link those on all my social media, and like I said, I have pretty much all of my articles either peer reviewed or otherwise linked on my website. Which is crazy because I think I'm up to somewhere close to 60 or more articles I think I've written over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Just not just for random fitness websites and things, various websites.
Yeah, incredible. Well, guys, I'll make sure to link up all of Peter's socials and obviously his website as well, which will be a great resource for you guys to go and check out more of Peter's work. But yeah, I'd like to obviously thank the listeners for tuning into this episode, and thank you, Peter, for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome to have you on, and maybe one day we'll come back with another episode on another topic. But yeah, today's been awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool, guys. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you back for episode 39. Cheers.